Tilea's Troubles, Part 103. The Defence of Ravola, Chapter 2. A Battle Report. Early Spring, 2404. Having scrambled, quite unladylike, beneath the clattering, shattering shower of bullets striking stone, Perette joined the brigands at the side wall, from where she could still see much of the enemy army, concentrated as it was before the gate tower. She could smell the taint of warpstone, a metallic tang in the corporeal air, and a stinging sharpness to the etheric breeze. The enemy were drawing near. The walls might soon be bristling with their ladders. Of course, she could not help but also notice the sudden appearance of the Ratman on the tower top along from hers, what with his protrusion of brightly coloured banners almost doubling his height. The new engine's Brabanzon crewmen, surprised as they certainly were, did not want to lose the chance to shoot successfully at least once, not after all their efforts to master the art as well as mount the engine, especially as everything was already prepared. So, despite their understandable discomfort at such a close and dangerous magical manifestation, they continued the process of firing. As the Ratman was obscured by the engine, Perette realised she dare not employ her magical fire against him, for fear of blowing up the gun, which seemed a more than likely outcome, if not a guaranteed one. It also occurred to her that if the Ratman was to descend the stairs instead of attacking the gunners, then he might open the gate, allowing the enemy to pour into the city. Looking down into the yard below, she saw Baron Garoy and his knights waiting, as planned, mounted and ready to challenge whoever made it over the wall. The young Baron had changed considerably since being wounded at Campogrotta. Not only had he been left somewhat slower and more deliberate in his actions, but his past arrogant aloofness seemed to have been knocked right out of him. This became painfully clear when Perette noticed Garoy had developed a romantic fondness for her, something surely impossible before his wounding. Before Campogrotta, she offended him so much he could not even bear her presence. Now he was genuinely fond of her, grateful for her help, and indeed held her in respect. So much so, he had agreed it was best that she commanded all the defenders, while he commanded his band of knights solely. Well, thought Perette, he was in the right place at the right time. She waved at him, gestured for him to enter the tower, and drew a hand across her neck to indicate some killing was needed inside. Garoy nodded once, then dismounted along with the rest of his knights to lead them into the gate tower. Now that the Baron and his knights had gone from the yard, the Brabanzon horsemen would have to take on their intended role, so they moved along to best position themselves for the task in hand. Assured that Garoy was on his way to take on the Ratman in the gate tower, Perette spun up a fireball and sent it scorching into the badly mauled Red Regiment, killing 2. Not satisfied, she decided to conjure bolts of fire onto the same, but this time the winds tore through her too strongly and spilled out uncontrollably. Another pair of Ratmen died, but much of the spell's strength burst from her own body to wash across the rooftop, killing 4 of the men standing behind her. She was left reeling, confused and ashamed by her error. This fight was proving very difficult for her, despite the safety of being atop a stone tower. The runaway magic did not seriously injure any of the trebuchet crew, but its stinging caress distracted them. For this time, their engines' hurled rocks landed far wide of the intended mark, damaging only the ground. Meanwhile, the brave gunners on the neighbouring tower, despite the warlord's presence close by, fired their piece. Its deafening report and impressively large belch of smoke assured them that it must have done well. If they had still been there when the smoke cleared, however, they may have seen that only 1 of the Ratmen in the Yellow Regiment was killed by their shot. The brigand archers, despite the horror of the calamitous deaths caused by their beloved lady, finished off the last of the rat ogres staggering in front of the longbowman's wall, allowing the latter to loose a volley instead at the severely mauled Red Regiment, killing 3 more. Much to everyone's surprise, friend and foe, this was still not enough to send them running. Upon the high, thin tower to the right of Perette's tower, there was a second gun, much lighter than the new contraption, and with only 1 barrel. The gunner had been waiting until the robed Ratmen were in range, and now let his linstock down to caress the priming powder with his match. A loud moment later, he gave a cheer, for he could see 4 of the enemy had lost their heads. The survivors, now less than half the number who had started the march towards the walls, were untroubled, however, for, as Perette had pondered earlier, they were indeed so intent upon killing the enemy in the service of their god that they cared not a jot for the deaths of their comrades, only that they should get their hands on the foe. And so it was, now that they were close enough to the walls, the robed rats began their charge, hefting their huge ladder as they came within a few steps. Urlak now summoned Crack's call, creating a crevice in the ground, running from his foot towards the gate tower. Perette, momentarily distracted by the rush of events, the swirl of considerations, and not least the death she had caused, failed to prevent this flow of magic. Like the crevice, Urlak's grin grew wider and wider as the Crack sped towards the tower, for he knew its power would take it right up to the building. Upon reaching the wall, a veritable craze of fissures appeared in the stones, coursing like the branches of a tree, upwards and outwards. Inside, Garroy and his knights realised the building was about to crumble, and turned to leave the same way they had come, much quicker than when they had entered. Luckily, all but one knight escaped. On the tower top, Warlord Urlak also saw the cracks, and without stopping to wonder why, certainly without time to realise the damage had been caused by his master, he escaped by leaping nimbly over the wall and raking down the stone, even as it buckled to land outside. There was nothing the crew of the engine could do, however, for they were too high for men to jump, and a flight of stairs away from the door. Down went the tower, and so too did they and their gun. The new gun had fired but once, and in so doing had killed merely one enemy warrior, while the trebuchet had slaughtered many tens of warriors. Of those not currently far too distracted to notice the event, of which there were not many, several lucky wagerers now wondered if they would live long enough to collect their winnings. Urlak grinned. No one would ever know whether he had always intended to topple the tower, and thus potentially kill Clan Scravel's warlord. Perhaps Gurthrak had disappointed him, offended him. Perhaps he was happy to sacrifice Gurthrak simply to draw some more of the foe into the tower before it fell. Perhaps he decided Gurthrak might become stuck with a multitude of arrows from the brigands before being able to strike. Maybe he did not care, or he just forgot that Gurthrak was there. Whatever the truth, it did not matter now. Gurthrak lived, and was left standing, somewhat winded, beyond the rubble. On the other side, Baron Garroy and his knights formed into a little company, all the better to face whatever came over that rubble. The red and yellow regiments had yet failed to reach the walls, but the rat ogres of Urlak's bodyguard did reach, much to the disconsolation of the poorly armed militia defending its rampart. The 3 massively monstrous rats hurtled up the wide ladder, and at the top they tore so viciously into the militia that 7 perished before they could even lunge their improvised weapons. The rest threw themselves off the wall and scrambled away into the city, whilst behind them the brutes and their whip-wielding packmasters took possession of the battlements and released roaring snarls in bloodthirsty glee. Further along the walls, the robed rats, however, found the fight to gain the wall much harder. Forced to use one arm to hold the ladder, and with the wall between them and the elevated foe, they only managed to kill 1 of the peasant militia, whilst losing 3 of their own. Their banner, being a cursed shroud of dripping death, fatally infected 2 more of the defenders, thus evening out the fight somewhat, but it was not enough to take the wall, and the fight continued. It was now the longbowmen's turn to experience the explosive peppering of their battlement. 2 died to the rattling gun's bullets, and another to the Giselle shots. As the dust cleared, they set about knocking arrows to their bows. The enemy might be assaulting the wall to their right, had already taken the wall to their left, and their dwarf-gifted gun might be lost, but the trebuchet's arm was being hauled back into place. Perette was still alive, and the enemy had been very badly mauled indeed. There was still a chance, surely, and they were not yet ready to flee. Perette squinted as she scoured the cloud of dust caused by the tower's collapse, looking for a sign that Baron Garroy was alive. Relief suffused her when she caught a glimpse of him. It would be such a shame for a young man so recently reformed to perish. A moment later, he was gone, having moved towards the wall the brutish rats had taken, obviously intending to prevent their further ingress. her attention was drawn to a sudden flurry of movement in amongst the ruins. A large swarm of rats was beginning to flow, almost like gushing water, over the stone rubble. Realising it might cause considerable trouble for the knights nearby, she conjured up a fireball to hurl at the vermin, but before she could fully hone its corporeal manifestation, its ethereal form was dissipated by the enemy wizard's counter-magic. She could sense he was still with the large yellow regiment, and so, hoping he was momentarily exhausted by his efforts, she immediately conjured up a flurry of burning bolts, which she sent raining down onto that very same regiment, killing 8 of them. While another load of rocks from the trebuchet missed its mark, the light gun in the tall tower did not, sending a burst of grape shot into the robed ratmen as they readied themselves for their next attempt to scale the wall. 6 of them perished. Only 1 of the Brabanzon riders' arrows struck the brutes on the wall, but the longbowmen did manage to kill the rattling team, who had been shooting at them. And yet, these deaths were insufficient to prevent the ratmen's advance. Both the Yellow Regiment and the pitiful remnant of the once huge Red Regiment at last reached the walls, placed their ladders, and began ascending. The Yellow Regiment climbed easily, for the wall was unoccupied, and as soon as the rat ogres had spotted the armoured men approaching below them, their bloodthirsty battle lust caused them to leap down to attack. That frantic, claustrophobic combat was the sight that greeted the Yellow Regiment as they topped the wall behind. More and more of the regiment's clan rats, still numerous despite their mauling by magical fire, were climbing the ladders. Further outside, the Gisellas agreed among themselves that it would be a terrible shame for them to miss out on the richest pickings in the city, and so both companies began lugging their long guns towards the walls. Seer Lord Urlak decided again to cast Skitterleap, as it had worked so well before, despite his subsequent collapsing of the tower. But this time the magic was unravelled by the red-haired enchantress's interference. The few robed rats left unblasted, burned or flattened, now reascended the ladder to kill 5 of the peasants and send the rest running from the wall. They lost 3 more of their own in so doing, but what few remained were momentarily satisfied. Warlord Gerthrak had also charged the wall occupied by the longbowmen, and so rejoined his Bonebreaker and the Red Regiment in their fight. 4 longbowmen perished in the struggle, while the Skaven were barely scratched. Thus it was that they took a wall, as the Brabanzon archers ran pell-mell into the street behind. Baron Garroy's petty noble companions lost 4 of their number to the rat ogre's fury, their armour failing to prevent the brute's brute strength, snapping their bones. Despite the direness of his situation, the young baron refused to look to his own safety, and the last of his brave companions chose to stand with him. Someone on the tower top shouted, "They're coming! Please, my lady, get out!" And Perette realised that either the Red Regiment or the monkish ratmen, or both, must be moving along the walls upon either side of the tower. If she did not leave now, they could trap her. Leaping across to the stairs, she almost threw herself down them, perilously taking the steep stone steps 2 or 3 at a time, bouncing and sliding along the wall in equal measure. When she burst out into the yard behind, she saw that the Brabanzon longbowmen had rallied in the street and were forming themselves into a line, and that their company's riders had moved over near to the tower, as if they had known she were coming. It was plain to her that the situation was desperate, especially as the walls elsewhere had been taken too. For now she could only deal with the most immediate threat, which was, without a doubt, the ratmen on the wall above her. The winds of magic were weak, but she wound enough etheric essence into her conjuring to send a fireball of some size blazing at the foe. The Bonebreaker's platform, upon which Gerthrak had ridden before he was skitterleaped away, burst into flames, as did several patches of its fur, while 2 clan rats tumbled, writhing and screeching from the wall. The survivors, Gerthrak included, scrabbled over the wall and down the ladders, having entirely lost the will to take any more of the cruel punishment they had thus far endured. They would not stop running for some time. As the last few Red Regiment warriors frantically stumbled, smoking, from the base of the wall, picking up their pace as they found their breath, a shadow moved past them. Another load of rocks barrelled through the air and smashed right into the Yellow Regiment, killing 13. Despite being divided by the wall, the survivors did not flee. Instead, those outside just redoubled their efforts to get up the ladder and onto what they hoped was the safety of the wall. Lord Urlak took a brief moment to look from the wall to where he could see the riders. Baron Garroy's final struggle against the rat ogres, Gerthrak's departure, the enemy horse and foot soldiers made ready for the fight in the street below, and the red-haired wizardess. On sight of her, fierce anger threatened to overwhelm him. But at that very moment he noticed the trebuchet was being dragged about to face him and the Yellow Regiment, even now that they were on the walls. Hissing in frustration, he snarled a command, and he and the warriors with him made their way into the corner tower, which they hoped would protect them. The verminous brutes fighting the armoured knights suddenly realised there was no one left for them to kill. Baring their teeth and growling, they looked around hungrily for someone or something else to pull apart. Below them, beneath their drooling blood and spit, with a taloned foot pressing down hard on his crumpled breastplate, lay the Baron's mangled corpse. Lord Urlak, busy squeezing into what he hoped was the safety of the tower, did not know it, but the trebuchet would not have the chance to shoot again. The last of the frenzied, robed rats had rushed out onto the main tower top, furiously tearing into the brigands and the crewmen, killing some with their blades, while 2 more fell to the curse of their magical banner. They then easily cut down the last of the Brabanzon, attempting to flee by way of the stairs Perette had used. Down in the street, Perette could hear the screams and commotion. When she looked up, she saw the crazed ratmen and their ugly banner peering over the crenulations. Rats were swarming across the rubble of the gate tower, while ratmen and brutes had already gained access to one of the city's quarters. The Gisellas were about to begin their ascent over the walls, and she could sense that the Skaven wizard, powerful enough to collapse fortified towers with his magic, still lurked somewhere. The city was lost, surely, and the veteran soldiers of the Brabanzon knew it. Perette was bruised, battered, and bewildered, and suddenly experienced a moment of befuddled calm. Just as she entertained, in her confusion, the mad notion that she could sit and rest a while, there came a commanding voice. "My lady, mount, if you please! Make haste, I beg of you! We must leave immediately!"